Hey everyone. I have to admit, I wasn't sure if I wanted to make this video or not, but I decided that it was important for me to reveal what I found for the sake of preserving video game history. I tried reaching out to the sound designer mentioned in this video, but he hasn't responded back to me, and so to respect their privacy, I ask that you please refrain from contacting them or anyone else mentioned here. My goal is not to drum up any controversy with this discovery, but rather to show appreciation for all the audio personnel who worked on the Metroid Prime trilogy. The audio in Metroid Prime has been a huge source of inspiration for me ever since I first laid my hands on the game back in 2004. I think it goes without saying that the music for these games has left a profound impact in my life. The same can be said for the exceptional sound design heard throughout the trilogy. All of Samus's UI and weapon sounds are top-notch and still hold up after hundreds of hours of gameplay, while the sci-fi drones and alien sounds are crucial in creating that dark ambience and mood that the Metroid series is known for. After Metroid Prime 3 was released in 2007, it was about 2 years later that I began to notice something strange. Several prominent and well-known Prime sound effects were beginning to show up in other media. In 2009, I read various online forum posts pointing out that High Voltage Software's Wii title, The Conduit, had Samus's charge beam sound effect in the game. Then, in 2011, the charge beam showed up yet again in Call of Duty Black Ops Zombies. Here it is again in 2013's Injustice, and again in the 2016 anime Bokurano. I also recall hearing the boost ball sound in an episode of Major Lazer, and in 2019 I stumbled upon this mecha dinosaur toy at my local Walmart that just so happens to make the power bomb noise. So, why were all these sounds from Metroid Prime popping up in random places? I had no luck in solving this mystery for the longest time, until I watched H-Bomber-Guy's video about Tommy Tallarico, and was reminded of the fact that he was briefly involved with the game. If you haven't seen the video already, I recommend you do so as it gives a lot more context with Tommy and what he's done in recent years. But this video isn't about any of that. We're here just to talk about his involvement with Nintendo. After viewing H-Bomber-Guy's video, I immediately started investigating, and after 2 weeks of intensive research, I have found new evidence that elaborates on what we already know and fills in missing details regarding Prime 1's audio production history. Several significant sound effects heard in Metroid Prime and its 2 sequels were made by veteran video game sound designer Joey Curis, who was uncredited for his work. Joey was an employee of Tommy Tallarico Studios during Prime's production, and both Tommy and Joey were hired as contractors by developer Retro Studios early on in the game's development to help create various sound effects. When I first heard of Tommy Tallarico's involvement with Prime, I thought his studio provided just temporary placeholder effects that were eventually replaced, and I assumed that's why there were no credits for either Tommy or Joey in the game. But as you'll see shortly, their involvement is more complicated than previously thought. It is a well-known fact that Metroid Prime had an immensely difficult production cycle. Retro Studios started work on 4 launch titles for the Nintendo GameCube in early 1999. However, 3 of those games would eventually end up getting cancelled by mid-2001 in order to focus on finishing Prime for the 2002 holiday season. We don't know exactly when Tommy and Joey were hired, but the earliest possible date would be around the beginning of 1999 when production started for the launch titles. However, Retro wouldn't start working on Metroid Prime until mid-2000, when Nintendo decided to take Retro's third-person action-adventure project, codenamed Metaforce, and turn it into the Metroid game we all know and love. It's possible that Tommy and Joey were initially providing sounds for Metaforce, and then the project transformed into Metroid Prime while they were working on it. Or, perhaps they were hired after Metaforce was already cancelled. If the latter is what happened, then that means the earliest possible time they could have started work would have been around mid-2000. On an archived version of Tommy's old website, he claims that once these 3 other launch titles were cancelled, Retro's internal audio department took over and the contract with Tommy Tallarico Studios ended. The last of these games to be cancelled was Raven Blade, an RPG that didn't get far in development. According to IGN, Nintendo announced the cancellation on July 19, 2001. Tommy's website also references an email from Metroid Prime 3's audio supervisor Scott Peterson specifically thanking Tommy and Joey for their work, and asking for higher quality audio of the sounds they created for Retro. This email is incredible because it confirms Joey's involvement and that his sounds actually made it into the final game. This email also reveals that Joey worked on Metroid Prime until July 18th, 2001, the day before Nintendo made their announcement about canceling Raven Blade. Unfortunately, the email doesn't point out which sounds Joey created. Considering Scott says that Joey's audio assets have become signature elements to the game and to Samus herself, one can only imagine which sound effects he's referring to. Well, for the first time, we could finally answer this question. In 2003, a year after Prime was released, the company Sound Ideas revealed their newest effects library titled the SFX Kit, produced by, you guessed it, Tommy Tallarico Studios. Inside this collection, there are several sounds that any Metroid fan would immediately recognize. These include several UI noises, both build-up and release sounds for the boost ball, and most notably, the charge beam. This is one of my favorite sounds from the game, and has become so synonymous with the arm cannon that it was later reused for Metroid Other M. This must be the sound library where all those other games and shows took Samus's sounds from. Due to the fact that the library was released in WAV format, each file contains metadata inside. When looking through the raw data, you can see that Joey Curious' name shows up in every single file in the library, almost 20,000 sounds. This discovery finally gives us definitive proof that Joey was the creator of some of Metroid Prime's iconic sound effects. As I browsed through the SFX kit, I noticed many similarities with the sounds Joey created and audio I've heard elsewhere in the Sound Ideas catalog. A few years ago, my friends and I discovered several sounds from Prime being sourced from Sound Ideas Series 8000 sci-fi libraries. The sounds for the doors, Samus's space jump boots, and Phazon ambience originate from this library with little to no edits in the final game. Not only that, but some of the original elements Joey used to make the weapons for Prime are also from this exact same library. In an interview from 2003 with Shiny Entertainment founder David Perry, Joey describes his creative process. When I do use the library, I always change the sound somehow, usually by combining it with something else to get the exact sound I want. And that's exactly what he did with the charge beam. He combined several Series 8000 elements to get the final product. Here's an example. Here's the main element Joey used for the boost ball. According to the file name in the SFX kit, this sound appears to have been originally designed for the charge beam, but ended up as the boost ball buildup noise. In fact, the boost ball audio file from the E3 build of Metroid Prime 3 references charge beam, as well as the fact that the audio was EQ'd to make it sound louder. There are several variations of the charge beam in the SFX kit, with Loop 7 being the one that appears to match up with the original audio asset. Loop 5 seems to be the original unedited sound, as you can see by the dynamics of the waveforms, whereas Loop 7 was put through a compressor and EQ'd slightly, both of which respectively crushed the waveform amplitudes and making it sound brighter in the process. The earliest appearance I can find of the charge beam can be heard in this rare Space World video from August 2001, right after Raven Blade's cancellation. The game still had well over a year away from its release date, and was in such an early stage of development that Chozo Ruins and the Beetles were the only location and enemies implemented at this point. As you can see, much of the game assets, including Samus's arm cannon, are drastically different from the final product, yet you can faintly hear Joey's charge beam, which would make it one of the oldest unchanged assets in the game. This falls in line with what Prime 1's audio lead Clark Wen said in his interview with Shinesparkers. When I started, only the power and combo beams were in the game. I thought they sounded pretty good, so I more or less left them as is. There is no definitive answer as to why Joey isn't credited in Prime, nor why he doesn't list the game on his resume. Perhaps there's something like an NDA from Nintendo that's preventing him from doing so, or maybe he would just rather not talk about it, much like other former Retro employees who wish not to discuss their past. Perhaps it's a similar situation to what happened with several Mercury Steam employees who were not credited for their work on Metroid Dread because, according to management, they didn't contribute past a certain threshold, or they left the company before Dread was completed, even though they worked on the game for months and their assets made it to the final retail game. Here's a summary of the facts. In either 1999 or 2000, Tommy Tallarico Studios were hired by Retro Studios, and Joey Curas was tasked to design sound effects as Prime was going through its hectic development and constant changes. On July 18, 2001, Tommy and Joey's contracts were terminated as Nintendo canceled all of Retro's games except for Prime. After the game was released, Tommy included Joey's work in the SFX Kit library, where recognizable Samus sound effects have been used in other media outside of Nintendo. While Tommy acted as the initial sound effects producer on Prime, much like how a music producer oversees the production of a track or an album, it was Joey who actually put the first audio assets together for the game. I feel that his contributions to Prime are important, and at the very least he deserves to have his name alongside the rest of the audio team in the credits. I learned a lot during the making of this video. I am reminded yet again of how important it is to preserve video game history and how much of an effort it takes to go through interviews, videos, archived websites, and sample libraries to piece all this information together, sometimes with incomplete results. I'm grateful for people like Kiwi Talks who are helping document the history of Prime's development by interviewing former Retro staff who worked on the game and sharing their stories. His interviews have been very helpful in understanding what really happened at Retro and what it takes to develop AAA titles for Nintendo. I am also reminded of how people who work in entertainment industries, like music or video games, are consistently underappreciated even today. As a musician, I have personally experienced this when I found out that one of my free sound samples I made when I was 18 had been used in a rather popular dubstep track from 2010 titled Hydraulic by Datsik. I was never credited for my sample, even though it forms the basis of the beat and you can clearly hear it being used. The same situation also applies to my friend Sock Sabian, aka Z-Time, and his samples used by Kenji Yamamoto for the music in the Prime trilogy. Z-Time and his Uncivilized Groove sample library were never mentioned in Prime's credits, however this is usually the norm with most royalty-free sample libraries, unfortunately. Even though Z-Time is finally getting some well-deserved recognition for his work, it took 19 years to do so. The lack of proper credits has been a huge problem in the video game industry since the early days of Atari. This led to some developers secretly hiding their names inside the titles they were working on, thus creating some of the first known Easter eggs. Sometimes only the company is credited, which may have been the case if things worked out with Tommy and Retro. A good example of what I'm talking about here can be found in Metroid Prime 2. Retro hired a company Dane Tracks as a contractor, just like Tommy Tallarico Studios, but it was Clark Wen who pointed out that Brian O. Watkins and his team at Dane Tracks were the ones actually responsible for the work. Fortunately, people and organizations are stepping up to try and solve this dilemma. The International Game Developers Association, or IDGA, have created a set of guidelines to assist in the crediting process. I recommend you read the Washington Post article on crediting in video games by Jack Yarwood, which gets into more detail about this problem. While this is a step in the right direction, these guidelines are not mandatory, and the IDGA doesn't have the authority to enforce them. I think if we, as consumers and fans, are more aware of these issues affecting the people who help bring our favorite games into reality, then maybe we can start advocating for them and show companies that it's important to credit anyone who has contributed to their products. Inaccurate credits, or a lack thereof, can be damaging to a person's career, and I hope that after all of this has come to light, the industry can begin to implement new crediting guidelines so that people like Joey or Zoc can receive the proper recognition they deserve for their hard work. This is Cinemax. Thanks for watching.